Hello everyone and welcome to another incredible game from the Global Chess League. It is round 6 and it is Jan Nepomniachtchi versus Magnus Carlsen, the former World Chess Championship duo. This World Chess Championship, Jan did not face Magnus. Magnus decided not to play. He faced Ding Liren. But still, they have faced each other many times in different time formats. This is Rapid now, and of course, we've mentioned already that Magnus Carlsen is even 2 times World Rapid Champion. And while Jan Nepomniachtchi never actually won the World Rapid Championship, he did get second place 3 times and third place once. So definitely not a stranger to the format. So let's check it out. It's a really long, grueling game. You will feel like you are really watching a game from a World Chess Championship match. So let's check it out. Nepo has the white pieces and he opens with pawn to e4. Magnus plays pawn to c5, going for his Sicilian defense, and Nepo opts for the Alapin variation, pawn to c3. And now you could play a lot of moves here, and a lot of moves are very good in this position, d5 and knight to f6 being just the top two. Magnus goes for pawn to e5, and this is I think it's like the 8th most popular move. So I mean, not offbeat, but not something you would play in a truly serious game. But he's testing Jan to see, if he knows his theory, and Jan shows that, of course, he does. Knight to f3, we have knight to c6, bishop to c4, and knight to f6. So now you have this weird-looking position where, look at what white played. e4, knight f3, and bishop to c4, and black has the 2 knights out and the pawn on e5. So it's basically the 2 knights defense with the inclusion of c5 and c3. So what does this mean? This means that Nepo will just treat it as a 2 knights defense. So he just goes knight to g5 and goes for the df7 pawn. And okay, pawn to d5 with e captures on d5. And now a move you don't really play in the 2 knights defense, but here Magnus plays it, knight captures on d5. And in the olden days, you've just obliterated everyone with white. Here you just sacrificed on f7. But Nepo doesn't. He, he strongly feels that Magnus is very much prepared for this, because if you capture and king captures, knight to f3 check. Now, the problem is what happens if king to e6. Of course, the knight cannot move. The knight is pinned. But if you go king to e6, the game just continues. Okay, yeah, you're down a piece. But can you checkmate the black king? Well, not really. Let's say pawn to d4, b5 now, forcing the bishop off of this diagonal. And after bishop captures, bishop to b7, putting the bishop on this diagonal. The game continues. White has some initiative, but of course, if Magnus is willingly going into this, you know that he's very much prepared. So first pawn to d4, we have c captures on d4, and now queen to b3, putting pressure on the knight here. Of course, if the knight moves, then you just get obliterated here, and of course, putting pressure on b7 if the light square bishop is developed. And that's exactly what Magnus does, as it is the top move recommended by the engine. So bishop to e6, and now you could capture on b7 first, but it's pretty much the same variation even if you don't. Knight captures on e6, we have f captures, and queen captures on b7. Rook to c8, and now castles by Nepo, queen to d7. And this is Magnus's idea. Okay, he's playing a bit risky, but he now wants to trade queens, and he has a strong center. He has a lot of pieces out. This is the game he wants to play. And while there is a game where queen captures on d7 was played, here we have queen to b5, and it is now already, as of move 12, that we have a completely new game. So let's see what Magnus had in mind here. He just continues development, bishop to e7, we have bishop to b3, and now castles. We have queen back to d3. Now maybe with ideas of shifting the bishop over to this diagonal to put pressure on Magnus's king side, and knight to a5. Attacking the bishop here, and well, you could play bishop to c2 and force g6. Nepo decides against it. He just plays bishop to d1, rook f to d8, and now bishop to f3. Also, you could maybe put pressure on that e6 pawn with bishop to g4, but just bishop to f3 for now. D captures on c3, knight captures, and knight captures on c3. Magnus offers a queen trade, which Nepo accepts with queen captures on d7. Also, it's not forced. You could also play something like queen to a6 to put pressure on this knight, while this knight is also being pressured. But he just goes for the trade. Queen captures, rook captures, and now b captures on c3. rook captures on c3, and now bishop to b2, attacking the rook, hoping to win back the extra pawn that Magnus has, but just rook to c5. Magnus says, if you want this pawn, you will have to fight for it. So, okay, rook 8 to d1. Nepo is down a pawn, but he has the bishop pair. The game is on both sides of the board, so of course he does have compensation. Rook captures on d1. We have rook captures, and now knight to c4, going after the bishop. Putting bishop on the back rank often proves, to be your demise. So just bishop to c3. Now hoping to get bishop to b4 in, but Magnus throws in a nice pawn to e4. The idea behind it is that if bishop captures on e4, you play knight to d6, attacking the bishop and this bishop, and then you have to settle for bishop to b4. After knight captures on e4, you will first pressure the knight, and only after black plays something, you will then capture the rook. Captures, and you will have 2 pieces for the rook. The pawn is also defended, so it's at least a better position for black. So after e4, bishop to d4 by Nepo, and now rook to a5, going after the a2 pawn. And okay, they trade. Bishop captures on e4, rook captures on a2. Magnus made a good trade here because he gave up his doubled e pawn for the a pawn, and now he has the outside passed pawn. So pawn to g3, creating some breathing room for the white king, and knight to d2 attacks the bishop. We have bishop to c6 and pawn to a5. Magnus starts advancing his passed a pawn. So king to g2, king to f7, and now bishop to c3. Knight to c4, we have rook to d7, putting pressure on the bishop here, and now knight to e3 with check, a nice way to help out with the defense of the bishop. King to f3, and now not going back with knight to f5. You could also play this, it's very safe, but Magnus throws in a nice rook to a3. And now Nepo attacks the rook, rook to b3, and now he kind of has to go for it. F captures on e3, rook captures on b2. Magnus able to eliminate the bishop pair, and now you're okay up a pawn. You've eliminated the bishop pair, so now you kind of feel that you are better. But on the other hand, it's bishops of opposite color, so even if you're up a pawn, it will be very hard to prove a point here. So rook to a7, going after the outside pass pawn. Rook captures on h2. Rook captures on a5, and now pawn to h5. Magnus preparing to grab more space here with g5. You're going to control a lot of squares in front of the white king if you do this. Rook to a6, now preparing to put pressure on the e6 pawn, and bishop to d6. We have bishop to b5 now, attacking the bishop. King to e7 defending, and bishop to c4. And now Magnus has to defend the e6 pawn, and of course he cannot move the bishop, but he has to be very careful here. You might think, okay, let's just play rook to h3, we capture on g3 with check, and it's game over. It's game over, yes, but not for Nepo. It would be game over for Magnus if he did this, because now rook captures on d6, and look at this. King captures, and king g2 traps the rook. You have nothing better than to capture this, and then after king captures on g3, okay, you do have the 2 connected pass pawns for the bishop, but it's going to be very easy to pick them off. Let's say g4 or h4, doesn't really matter. King h4, and off goes the pawn. Next, you're going to play bishop to d3 here, create a wall against the black king. Pretty much it. So instead, after bishop to c4, Magnus goes for g5 right away. He cuts off the white king, and now Nepo again with the tricky idea, pawn to e4. Now he is ready to meet rook to h3 with pawn to e5. And now, of course, if the bishop moves, then you collect on e6. So Magnus just goes rook to c2, attacks the bishop. We have bishop back to a2. And here Nepo had sort of a slightly better idea. I'm just going to show it because it's super interesting. And I know perhaps we are showing a bit too many lines for a rapid game, but like I said, they're not playing rapid silly moves. They are playing top engine moves, pretty much any move. So it would be a shame not to show it. Here e5 is the strongest move because you have to take advantage of this. And now let's say rook captures on c4. Captures on d6 with check, king to d7, and now rook to a5, ready to collect those pawns. And now, for example, h4, rook captures on g5, and now rook to c3 with check. First king to f4, and rook captures on g3. And you can't really trade. If you trade everything, captures, and captures, then black is completely winning because black will get the opposition, and of course the rest is history. So what you will have to do after rook captures on g3 is just move, and then okay, you will fight to save the game. Black is better here, but you will definitely have chances. However, after rook to c2, Nepo did not go for e5. He played bishop to a2, and now Magnus plays rook to c5. we have king to e3, now pawn to h4. He creates a passed pawn, captures, and rook to a7 with check. We have king to f6, rook to h7, putting the rook behind the passed pawn. And how does Magnus defend it? Well, pawn to h3. A very tricky maneuver, because now, of course, if you capture, then just rook to c3 check will pick up the rook. So king to d4. Here, another tricky move was bishop captures on e6, but Nepo doesn't play it right away. He first prepares it with king to d4, rook to c2, and bishop captures on e6 now. We have bishop to e5 check first by Magnus, and now king to d5. The problem is if you go down the board, then rook to c3 check, king to d2, and now just king captures on e6, you're down a full piece. Of course, the pawn is now protected. So after bishop to e5 check, king to d5 was played. Now comes rook to d2 check, king to c6, and pawn to h2. How can Nepo defend against this? Bishop to g4, rook f2, rook to h3, king to g5, and now, okay, with bishop to e6, you sort of still hold if you just move the bishop, but here Nepo played bishop to f3, and now feel free to pause the video and win the game for Magnus while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, and I'm sure all of you were able to do it, a big congratulations. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is rook captures on f3. That's, of course, the move. You clear the h1 square for the pawn, rook captures on f3, and now pawn to h1 with queen, rook to f5 with check, king to g4, and now rook captures on e5. And now, of course, everyone knows that rook against the queen is completely winning. What about a rook against queen against a rook and pawn? Well, of course, it's completely winning. It's the exact same thing, only first you have to dispose of the pawn, and you do so by limiting the movement of the white king and the white rook. So here Magnus made some moves. He first got his queen and king up the board. He had to do it, in a timely fashion. King to d4. Then he gave some checks. You can do this many different ways. It's only important to really limit the mobility of white's pieces. And now Nepo had to move the pawn. That's the point. So this position really, because if you try to sort of keep this fortress here, you cannot do it. If you play something like rook to e5, because what other move can you play? You have no squares for your king, you have to move the rook, but then queen f6 check picks up the rook. And if you don't do this, well, there's just not much. If rook to e8, again, queen to f6 check, the king will move, and then, of course, you will attack the rook. After the rook moves, queen to g6 check, picks up the pawn, and then queen and rook, we all know, of course, is completely winning. So that's why Nepo, after king to c6, decided to advance the pawn. There's simply no other way, and now, again, you limit even more the movement of the white king and rook. So here, rook to g7, queen f6 check, rook f7, queen to d8 check, king to g7, and now king captures on e6. There was no way to save the pawn. Rook to f1, queen to g5 with check, king to f8, and now queen to b5 with check. Nicely, sorry, not with check, just attacks the rook. Rook to f7, and now queen to h5 attacks the rook. We have rook to e7 check, king to f6, and he was in this position on move 80 to that Jan Nepomniachtchi resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. How are you defending? Of course, these three squares are covered by the black king. The threat is queen to h8 checkmate, and you don't have a way to prolong this. You could play something like rook to g7. Okay, now queen to h8 can be met with this, but now you play queen h6, and that's it. The rook falls on the next move. King e8, queen captures, and now, of course, after king d8, queen to b7, you limit all of the squares. Only square available is the e8 square, and once king to e8 is played, queen to e7 or to c8 will be checkmate. So, of course, Nepo knows this, and after this very nice move, he just resigned. Sorry, he just resigned the game. So yeah, very nicely done by Magnus. Nepo played a brilliant game, but in the end, that one pawn was all Magnus needed. He was able to trade his double e pawn for that beautiful passed a pawn. Then, when the passed a pawn became too dangerous, he traded it for the h pawn, and then, well, here. There were a couple of moments where maybe Nepo could have played a little bit better, but it was, I mean, such a complicated game. Of course, you cannot you cannot blame him for losing this. But again, even though Magnus won on his board, his team lost. Just for those of you who are interested, there you have it. Magnus won on board 1 with the black pieces, so he does get more points, but Abdusatro defeated Gukesh, Tanjongi defeated Irina Krush, and also Batiashvili defeated Elizabeth Pets, but Pragnananda defeated Sadvani also on the last board with the black pieces. So yeah, you do get more points for winning with the black pieces, but here it's not enough, as well, that's 8 points, and 3 wins with the white pieces, that's 9 points. So the Balan Alaskan Knights have defeated the Alpine Warriors, but it was a very close call. Magnus and Prague doing good work with the black pieces. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. A bit of a longer one, and we've explored a couple of lines extra. Okay, I know maybe it's a bit silly for a rapid game, but you've seen how beautiful the lines were, and I could have shown more. I mean, it's a very rich game, and I'm sure that when Jan faces Magnus, regardless of the format and the tournament, he will always bring his A game. But I'm sure Magnus does the same for every game, regardless of who he is playing. So yeah, once again, really hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank an anonymous person, Doug and Repka Van Bentuzen, Thomas Fetterli, Dan McCormick, and James Eugene Cashman for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.